قل يا أهل الكتاب تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم. O people of the book, meaning the Jews and the Christians, come to a mutual understanding between us and you. Here the Quran encourages Muslims to create a healthy environment for dialogue, especially with Jews and with Christians.
Fructum dabit. It will give fruit. So you have to be patient and to explain once more and try to get people to understand properly. And that, of course, requires an effort on your part also to understand their position properly, and a readiness to begin again.
This is a story about mutual respect and understanding, the kind that allows us to resolve conflict through dialogue. It's about the respect and understanding that developed between two men, one Christian, one Muslim.
The story of Francis and the Sultan gives us a new paradigm for encountering the other, for dealing with the other, and ultimately for embracing the other. The alternative is violent confrontation.
The year is 1099. Jerusalem, the birthplace of Christianity, is also a holy place for Muslims, and they have controlled the city for 400 years. Christians of the Western Roman Empire decide it's time they get the city back. And that leads to the First Crusade.
It's hard for us to picture how shocking it was for European Christians to realize that the holy places where Jesus walked and lived had been taken over by what they perceived as non-believers. And there was something very possessive about Christianity, unlike Jesus himself. Very possessive, as if Christianity owned the Middle East. They're in Europe. They're going over to the Middle East to take back for themselves that which rightfully belongs to Christianity.
Their mission proves surprisingly difficult. 4 Crusades and many bloody battles later, Muslims still control Jerusalem. So the Pope calls for a 5th Crusade.
And he is calling as well for crusade preachers to work the people up into an interest in this war against Islam. And Francis doesn't buy into that.
Born into wealth, young Francis had ambitions of becoming a knight, a warrior. But through a series of revelations, he is drawn to a life of poverty and peacemaking. Then one day, he encounters a leper, and his conversion is sealed.
That's such a crucial turning point in his life, because he comes to recognize in the person of this decomposing human being in front of his very eyes the stench, the repulsive nature of this person. Somehow through grace, he realizes that this is his fellow human being, his brother or his sister. That's the great insight of Francis in the encounter, that all men and women, without exception, are brothers and sisters one to another. That's the founding insight of the Franciscan fraternity.
No one is excluded from Francis's vision of universal kinship. So when he and his friars go to the Holy Land, their mission is not to defeat the enemy, but to embrace them. July 1219. Francis arrives in Egypt to find the Crusaders ready to take the city of Damietta.
It's important to point out that when Francis goes to the Holy Land in 1219, he is not going only to encounter the Sultan. He seems to go as well to preach against the crusade. So he's within the Crusader camp, and according to the stories we have, with at least one companion, Illuminato. The very first thing that he does is he attempts to, in a sense, restrain the hand of the Christian army from laying siege to the fortress at Damietta. They laughed at him, they mocked him, and they basically just pushed him aside and went on their way. He was one man in a raggedy habit with a companion who lifted up his voice, and he was dismissed accordingly. At that point, Francis and Brother Illuminato go across enemy lines to the Muslim camp. They're treated as infiltrators, they're treated as possible spies, but eventually they are brought over into the camp of the Sultan, al-Kamil.
As a boy in his father's court, al-Kamil learned to trust both Christian and Jewish advisors. When he becomes Sultan, he encourages interaction with traders and scholars from the West, and is also willing to negotiate with the Crusaders.
In fact, he was even accused of being too sensitive to the other side, because he always wanted to negotiate, communicate, Today we would call it dialogue.
Francis wasn't coming as a negotiator, I don't think, to sit down, now let's work out a peace plan between the Crusaders and the Muslim population. He came talking about the gift that they both have in God, that the great gift of God is peace.
Francis didn't speak Arabic, and as far as I know, al-Malek al-Kamil did not speak whatever Italian dialect Francis spoke. It was the way in which they behaved towards one another and where they treated one another that communicated, that transcended the language difficulties.
My brother Francis, this is what we believe as Muslims. We all worship the same God. And when we say Muhammad is the messenger of God, all we're saying is that he was chosen by God, he was blessed by God, but we consider him a prophet for all of humanity. We consider him a blessing. We believe in prayer. As individuals, we have a personal relationship with God. We give in charity. We fast, We believe that fasting can cleanse our souls. We make pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is not just something for us as individuals, it's for us to go out and meet the world. and recognize the fact that Islam is a universal religion, just as Christianity is a universal religion. So as a result of us having these great similarities, I mean, can we build upon this? Can you go back, in fact, and let people know we're not people who are interested in spreading our religion by the sword?
We're starting at a totally different level than an intellectual level. Now, who is right and who is wrong? And what do you believe and what do I believe? I come with all of my truth to you, Sultan, and you are presenting your truth to me. And we are subject to one another in the truth of who we are. In this willingness to be open to the truth of who each one of us is where peace begins to happen.
How can the Sultan be impressed by a man that appears so naive and so humble? We have to remember that in both Christian and Muslim tradition, holy people command considerable respect. In Francis, the Sultan sees a powerful spiritual presence. He has seen it before in people he greatly admires, the Muslim scholars and mystics known as the Sufi.
In the Quran, it says, "Wherever you look, there is the face of God." That's where a Sufi starts. Mystics, like Francis, like Sufis, do not limit God. Everything, every person, everything is imbued with the divine. If you approach the world in that way, then that explains what happened between Francis and the Sultan.
The two men part in friendship, but is either of them attracted to the faith of the other? After all, it is common at this time for Christians to convert to Islam and Muslims to convert to Christianity. According to one Franciscan source, the Sultan says to Francis at the end of their visit, "Pray that God may show me the right path that I should walk."
There are many paths to God. Your way might be one, my way might be another. God is showing us each our own path, and we should have the freedom to follow that path, because the important thing isn't the path. The important thing is God, who is at the goal of our path, the goal of our journey.
The Sultan is a devout Sunni Muslim, but he is not above acknowledging to Francis that he may yet have something to learn. Unlike the Sultan, Francis is not from a multicultural world, and of course, he is a devout Christian. What is his reaction to his first encounter with Islam? When Francis returns home in 1220, he revises the rule he wrote for his friars before he left. He adds a whole new section about their mission in the Muslim world.
He says, when you go among the Muslims, when you go among unbelievers, don't take it into your head to start preaching in the public squares. Especially, don't go preaching against the Muslims and their religion. Simply go and live among them as good Christians would live. And if they ask you, are you a Christian? Tell them, yes, you're a Christian.
If God wills, you can preach the gospel to them. The very fact that Francis adds those words, if God wills, is very Islamic, inshallah, if Allah wills it, if God wills it.
Francis's mission strategy allowed Franciscans to serve in Egypt and the Christian holy places in the Levant. In his writings after 1220, Francis shows other influences from his time among the Muslims. In letters written to both civil and spiritual leaders, he suggests a new call to prayer.
The friars and all of the people, when the bells ring, should fall down and praise God in adoration, sometimes even on the dust itself. He was very influenced, I think, by the salat, the praying 5 times a day.
Young and old and rich and poor, no matter how powerful or how weak, touch their heads to the ground before the presence of God in the world. How could Francis not be impressed by that?
August 1224. Francis goes to the mountain of Laverna for 40 days of prayer and fasting.
There were already preparations being made by Pope Honorius III to start another crusading effort to go to Damietta and destroy Muslim power and its Sultan al-Kamil. I believe Francis went to that mountain profoundly depressed about this eventuality. And he goes to make a prayer of fasting on behalf of the avoidance of further bloodshed there in the Holy Land. As he's meditating upon the cross of Christ, he receives the wounds of Christ. They literally explode out of his own body onto his hands and onto his feet and to his side, just like the wounds of Christ. He asks for a piece of parchment, a small piece of parchment, and he writes what are called the praises of God. You are love, you are charity, you are peace, you are wisdom, you are hope, you are mercy, you are patience. Some scholars believe that these are his version of the 99 beautiful names of Allah.
In the years that follow his meeting with Francis, the Sultan offers a variety of peace terms to the Crusaders. He surrenders Jerusalem to the Christians in exchange for the guaranteed safety of its Muslim population. Finally, a peace treaty is signed. Francis does not live to see that day. As a young friar in Cairo, Brother Michael served in a leprosy clinic.
People that I served in Egypt knew that I was a Christian. They knew that I was a rahib, a monk, a friar. They knew that I would have done anything for them. They knew that I was there to serve them. I believe they knew that I did that because I was operating out of my Christian faith. If you're a Muslim, you live the life of the Prophet. For a Franciscan, you walk in the way of Francis, according to the gospel.
To this day, Franciscan friars and sisters continue to serve in Cairo. Researchers, many of them Muslim, use the Franciscan collection of rare Arab Christian texts. And the Latin language classes taught by the friars are a daily opportunity for dialogue between Muslim and Christian students. The Franciscan friars also serve non-Catholic Christian families. Earlier, before cultural tensions made it difficult, the friars served neighbors of all faiths. They hope someday soon to be able to do that again.
Power very often destroys the human fraternity. One of Francis's great insights was to restore and live out the integrity of human relationships, the integrity of the human fraternity, by giving up the power over in order to use power to serve one another.
Can we make the Franciscan model of dialogue work for us today?
The challenge is, can we have the courage to go beyond our uniqueness into someone else's territory, to explore it, to feel at home in it, yet feel safe enough to come back to my own home?
When you are rooted in your faith, you can reach out to other people. You're not afraid. And I think that is something that we have to impress on people. It's not by giving up your religion that you're going to foster dialogue. It's by living out your faith to the full that you will foster the dialogue. So you're not to be afraid of this encounter with the other. And the encounter with the other will change you in some way.